The moment my solar app pinged at 2:14 a.m., I knew someone was stealing from me. Not borrowing. Not accidentally misrouting power. Stealing, clean and deliberate, while the neighborhood slept and my panels quietly worked under a full moon. The absurd part was that the theft didn't spike my bill first, it spiked my confidence, because only one person in this HOA was arrogant enough to think electrons didn't leave fingerprints. I live at the edge of the development where the houses thin out and the rules get fuzzy. When I bought the place, the HOA tried to scare me off with a binder thick enough to qualify as a doorstop. I read it, signed it, and then installed a solar system that made half the board uncomfortable. 32 panels, battery backup, a smart inverter, and a bidirectional meter that logged everything down to the second. I liked knowing exactly how much power I made, used, stored, and exported. It was satisfying in a quiet, orderly way. Karen hated it immediately. She was the HOA vice president then, though she introduced herself as if she ran the city. She had that smile that never reached her eyes and a voice trained to sound reasonable while saying unreasonable things. The first time she came over, she stood on my driveway and squinted at the panels like they were personally insulting her. "Those need approval," she said, gesturing vaguely upward. "They're already approved by the county," I told her. "And the utility. And the state rebate program." She nodded slowly, the way people do when they plan to ignore you later. "HOA approval is separate." That was our first dance. It wouldn't be the last. For months, things stayed tense but quiet. My system went live. My electric bill dropped to almost nothing. On good days, I exported power back to the grid and watched the credits stack up. Karen sent emails about aesthetics and uniformity and how some residents were concerned about reflections. I replied with diagrams, permits, and polite sentences that said no without using the word. Then the app pinged at 2:14 a.m. At first I thought it was a glitch. Solar doesn't produce at night, obviously, but battery discharge still shows patterns. What didn't make sense was the load profile. My house was asleep. No HVAC cycling. No appliances running. Yet my battery was dumping power at a steady, hungry rate, like something downstream had just woken up starving. I sat up in bed and opened the live feed. The numbers were wrong. Not just high, but directional. Power wasn't just leaving my battery, it was flowing out through the inverter in a way that only happened when the grid requested it. Except the grid hadn't requested anything. The utility portal showed normal demand. No alerts. No events. I stared at the screen, heart thumping, and then I saw it. A second endpoint. A ghost load that shouldn't exist, pulling clean power as if it belonged there. Someone had tied into my system. By morning, I was calm in that dangerous way where your anger has already done the math. I walked the perimeter, coffee in hand, eyes open. The conduit from my panels ran exactly where it always had, locked and sealed. The meter box was untouched. But when I followed the line toward the shared utility corridor between properties, I noticed fresh soil. Too fresh. Someone had dug, hurriedly, and tried to hide it. I didn't touch anything. I took photos. Lots of them. Wide shots, close-ups, timestamped. Then I checked the app again. The load was gone. Whoever it was had finished their midnight snack. Around noon, Karen knocked on my door. She didn't wait for me to answer before stepping back and folding her arms, already in performance mode. "We've been getting complaints," she said. "Of course you have," I replied. "About your solar system." Again. I leaned against the doorframe. "What about it today?" "There's concern that you're drawing too much power from the grid and destabilizing the local transformer." That almost made me laugh. Almost. My system exports more than it imports. The utility loves me. She smiled tightly. "Well, that's not what our electrician says." Our electrician was new. I'd seen his truck around Karen's house the week before, parked a little too long, the two of them talking like conspirators. I made a mental note. "Funny," I said. "Because my data says the opposite." Her eyes flicked, just for a second. Data can be misleading. Not this kind. She shifted her weight. The HOA is considering a temporary suspension of your export privileges until we can verify compliance. You can't do that. We can recommend it to the utility. I nodded slowly. Sure you can. She left looking satisfied, like she'd landed a blow. I waited until her car turned the corner before opening the app again. Right on schedule, the ghost load reappeared. Not at my house. Not at the grid. Somewhere else, pulling power through a path that shouldn't exist. I followed the numbers like breadcrumbs. Timestamped. Logged. Immutable. The inverter recorded phase angles, voltage drops, microsecond delays. This wasn't sloppy. It was bold. Someone had installed a transfer switch, probably temporary, probably illegal, and they were counting on me not understanding my own system. That night I didn't sleep. I watched the feed. At 1:58 a.m., the load came online. At 2:14, it ramped up. At 3:02, it shut off clean. Same pattern. Same signature. At 8 a.m., the utility called me. We're seeing some unusual backfeed patterns associated with your meter, the technician said carefully. I bet you are. Have you made any recent modifications? None. There was a pause. We may need to send someone out. Please do. By noon, a white truck was parked outside Karen's house. Not mine. Hers. The electrician was there again, looking less confident. Karen stood on her porch, arms crossed, talking fast. I watched from my window as the utility tech opened a panel and froze. Then he looked up. Then he looked at Karen. By evening, my app had a new alert. Unauthorized downstream connection detected. Evidence preserved. Utility investigation opened. I sat back on the couch, phone warm in my hand, and let myself smile for the first time all day. Karen had helped herself to my solar power like it was communal, like rules were suggestions and physics was optional. She'd forgotten one small thing. Meters don't care who you are. And they remember everything. By the next morning, the neighborhood felt different, like the air had been rearranged overnight and everyone could sense it but didn't know why. Cars slowed when they passed Karen's house. Curtains twitched. The HOA group chat went quiet in a way that never meant peace, only preparation. I hadn't heard from the utility yet, which told me plenty. When they go silent, it's because they're measuring twice before cutting once. I made breakfast, opened my laptop, and pulled up the data again, not because I needed to, but because it grounded me. Clean lines. Clear timestamp. Power flowing where it shouldn't, stopping exactly when someone thought they were done. There was no arguing with it. This wasn't a billing dispute. This was infrastructure theft. At 9:37 a.m., my doorbell rang. Not Karen this time. It was Mark from 2 houses down, standing awkwardly with his phone in his hand like he wasn't sure whether to record the conversation or apologize for it. He glanced past me, as if expecting Karen to materialize behind the couch. Hey, he said. Weird question, but have you had any power issues lately? I raised an eyebrow. He shifted his weight. Because my lights flickered last night. Around 2. And then this morning, Karen was asking if anyone noticed outages. That did it. The puzzle pieces slid together with a click that was both satisfying and infuriating. She wasn't just stealing my power. She'd destabilized the local loop enough that other houses felt it. Not enough to trip breakers or set off alarms, just enough to be noticeable. Enough to create a story. No outages on my end, I said. But I did notice unauthorized usage. His eyes widened. Unauthorized like illegal. Unauthorized like someone connected equipment where it doesn't belong. He let out a slow breath. Great. Before he could say anything else, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, grimaced, and slipped it back into his pocket without replying. I didn't need to ask who it was. The HOA email hit an hour later. It was long, rambling, and carefully vague. It mentioned community safety, power stability, and an ongoing review of non-standard energy systems. It did not mention theft. It did not mention the utility truck parked outside Karen's house. It did, however, suggest that residents refrain from speculation and direct all questions to the board. Karen signed it with her full title. I forwarded it to the utility contact who'd called me the day before, added my logs as attachments, and wrote a single sentence. This seems related. The reply came faster than I expected. We're on it. That afternoon, Karen showed up again. This time she didn't knock. She rang the bell twice, hard, and when I opened the door she stepped forward like she intended to come inside. I blocked the frame with my shoulder and waited. "We need to talk," she said, voice tight. "About what?" "Your solar system." Again. She took a breath, clearly rehearsed. "The utility is asking questions. They're confused about your configuration." "They shouldn't be." She leaned in, lowering her voice. "You didn't disclose everything to the HOA." I laughed then, a short, sharp sound that surprised both of us. "I disclosed everything required by law." "This isn't about law," she snapped. "This is about community responsibility." "You mean community access?" Her eyes flashed. "Don't be ridiculous." I held up my phone and tapped the screen. The app was open, live. The ghost load was active again, drawing power like a leech. The timestamp ticked forward, steady and damning. "Care to explain that?" I asked. She froze. Not dramatically. Not obviously. Just enough. Her pupils contracted. Her jaw tightened. In that half-second, the mask slipped, and I saw calculation where outrage was supposed to be. "I don't know what that is," she said finally. "Funny. Because it lines up perfectly with the temporary subpanel installed behind your garage." Her face went pale. "That's a lie." "Is it?" "Because the utility thinks otherwise." She straightened, anger flooding back in to cover the fear. "You're accusing me of theft." "I'm stating facts." She jabbed a finger toward my chest. "You think you're smarter than everyone else. With your gadgets and your data. I think I understand my own system." She scoffed. "You don't own the sun." "No. But I own the wires." She stared at me, breathing hard, then laughed, a brittle sound. "This isn't over." "It never is," I said. She turned and walked away, heels striking the pavement too hard, too fast. I watched her go, then closed the door and locked it, not because I was afraid she'd come back, but because something had shifted. The game was no longer about petty HOA power plays. It was about consequences. That night, the load didn't come online. Instead, I got a notification I'd never seen before. Meter isolation request initiated. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. "This is the utility again," the technician said. "We've identified an unauthorized tie-in downstream of your meter. It appears to be supplying a single residence." I waited. "We've disconnected it." Another pause. "And we're escalating the case." I thanked him and hung up, then sat in the quiet and listened to my house hum. The battery charged smoothly. The inverter purred. Everything was back where it belonged. At 11:42 p.m., my doorbell camera caught movement across the street. Karen stood on her porch in the dark, phone pressed to her ear, pacing. She gestured wildly, pointing toward my house, then toward her garage. At one point, she slammed her hand against the siding hard enough to rattle. I watched the clip twice, then saved it. Because meters remember everything. And cameras don't forget either. The HOA emergency meeting was scheduled for 48 hours later, which in HOA time meant immediately after Karen finished figuring out which version of the truth she wanted to sell. The notice hit inboxes late at night, flagged urgent, with the usual language about attendance being strongly encouraged. I could almost hear her typing it, each word chosen to sound official and reasonable, each omission deliberate. I went anyway. The community room smelled like burnt coffee and carpet cleaner. Folding chairs were arranged in uneven rows, and the board table sat at the front like a jury bench. Karen took the center seat, of course. She wore a blazer she saved for moments when she wanted to look persecuted but professional. To her left sat the HOA president, a man who preferred not to notice problems until they forced eye contact. To her right was the electrician, the same one whose truck I'd seen lingering by her garage, now dressed in a polo shirt with a logo that looked freshly ironed. Karen opened the meeting with a practiced sigh. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began. "As you may be aware, we've been dealing with some irregularities in our community power usage." Murmurs rippled through the room. Someone glanced at me. Someone else glanced away. "These irregularities," she continued, "may be linked to non-standard solar installations that were not fully disclosed to the board." There it was. The pivot. I raised my hand. She ignored it. "We've brought in a licensed electrician to explain the situation in simple terms," she said, gesturing to the man beside her. "He'll help us understand the risks involved when individual homeowners take energy matters into their own hand." The electrician cleared his throat. "Solar systems can be complex," he said. "If not integrated properly, they can backfeed into neighboring properties, causing instability." "That's not how that works," someone said from the back. Karen shot them a look. "Please let him finish." He nodded gratefully. "In some cases, power can flow where it's not intended, especially if safeguards are bypassed." I raised my hand again. Karen finally acknowledged me with a tight smile. "Yes." I stood. My heart wasn't racing. That surprised me. I felt calm, anchored by the fact that I didn't need to convince anyone of anything. The truth had receipts. "What safeguards were bypassed?" I asked. The electrician hesitated. "Well, hypothetically, if a homeowner installed—" "No hypotheticals," I said. "What safeguards were bypassed?" He glanced at Karen. She jumped in. "This isn't a cross-examination." "It kind of is," Mark said from 2 houses down. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the projector with a cable I'd brought just in case. The screen flickered, then filled with a clean interface of graphs and timestamp. "This is my system's log," I said. "It records every watt entering or leaving my meter." Karen leaned forward. "You can't just—" "On Tuesday night at 1:58 a.m., an unauthorized load appeared downstream of my inverter," I continued. "It drew power steadily for just over an hour, then disconnected. This happened 3 nights in a row." The room went quiet. That load did not originate from my house. It did not originate from the grid. It originated from a temporary connection installed beyond my meter. I zoomed in on the graph. The signature was unmistakable. Even to someone who didn't understand the technical details, the story was clear. Something foreign had latched on and fed until it was cut off. Karen stood abruptly. "This is misleading." "Is it?" I asked. "Because the utility disagrees." The HOA president looked up. "The utility is involved. Very involved." The electrician shifted in his chair, sweat beading at his temples. "I just advise on compliance," he muttered. "Funny you mention compliance," I said. "Because temporary subpanels installed without permits are a violation of both HOA rules and state law." Karen's voice rose. "You're accusing a board member of criminal behavior." "I'm presenting data." She pointed at the screen. "Data can be manipulated. Not this data." She turned to the room, arms spread. "This is exactly what I warned you about. Technical jargon used to intimidate and confuse." A woman in the front row stood up. "My lights flickered those nights," she said. "Right around 2. Another voice chimed in. "Mine too." Karen's face tightened. "Coincidences happen." The HOA president cleared his throat. "Karen, did you have any electrical work done recently?" She laughed, sharp and humorless. "Are you seriously asking me that?" He didn't laugh back. The room felt heavy now, like everyone realized they were standing on a trapdoor. I took a breath and went for the hinge. "The utility isolated the unauthorized connection last night," I said. "Since then, there have been no fluctuations." Karen spun toward me. "You coordinated this behind our backs." "I coordinated nothing. They acted on evidence." The electrician stood suddenly. "I need to clarify something," he said quickly. "The work I did was based on instructions I was given." Karen shot him a look that could have cut glass. "Instructions to connect a load to an existing solar feed," he continued, voice shaking. I was told it was temporary and approve. The room erupted. Karen slammed her hands on the table. This is absurd. He's lying to save himself. The electrician looked at her, eyes wide. You said it was fine. The HOA president stood. Enough. We're stopping this meeting. Karen rounded on him. You can't. I can, he said quietly. And we're contacting our attorney. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked unsure of what to say. As people filed out, whispers followed her like static. I packed up my cable and slipped my phone back into my pocket. Karen didn't look at me as I passed, but I could feel the heat of her glare. Outside, the evening air felt lighter. My phone buzzed with a new alert. Utility investigation status updated. I smiled to myself. She'd tried to turn the room against me, to drown facts in noise and authority. But she'd underestimated one thing. Data doesn't get flustered. And it doesn't back down. The morning after the HOA meeting, my driveway was blocked. Not dramatically. No cones or tow truck. Just Karen's SUV parked sideways at the end of my drive, hazard lights blinking like she was doing me a favor. I stood at my front window for a full 30 seconds, coffee cooling in my hand, just to make sure I was really seeing it. When I stepped outside, she was already waiting, arms crossed, sunglasses on, posture rigid. We need to talk, she said. You're blocking my driveway. Temporarily. Move your car. She smiled thinly. As soon as we resolve this. Resolve what? This situation you've created. I laughed, slow and deliberate. You mean the situation where you got caught stealing electricity? Her jaw tightened. Watch your mouth. Or what? She stepped closer. Or the HOA will fine you for every violation we can find. Landscaping. Exterior lighting. Unauthorized equipment. We'll bleed you with paperwork until you give up. There it was. No data. No confusion. Just a threat. I took out my phone and tapped the screen. The camera app was open. Recording. Say that again, I said. Her smile vanished. Turn that off. No. She looked around, realizing too late that neighbors were watching. Mark stood on his porch. Someone else pretended to water their lawn. Karen straightened, voice suddenly loud and official. You're interfering with HOA operations. You're trespassing, I replied. And blocking access to my property. She scoffed and waved a hand. Don't be dramatic. I pointed at the SUV. Move the car. She stared at me for a long moment, then pulled her phone out and dialed. Hi, she said sweetly when someone answered. Yes, I need an officer. There's a homeowner causing a disturbance. I smiled. Perfect. The patrol car arrived faster than I expected. Small town response times had a way of speeding up when HOA board members called. The officer stepped out, hand resting casually on his belt, eyes moving between us. What seems to be the problem? Karen spoke first. He's harassing me. Accusing me of things. Recording me without consent. I held up my phone. This is my driveway. She blocked it. The officer looked at the SUV, then back at Karen. Is this your vehicle? Yes, but you can't block a private driveway, ma'am. She bristled. I'm vice president of the HOA. That doesn't change traffic laws. I felt something loosen in my chest. She turned on me. He's been manipulating electrical systems that affect the whole neighborhood. The officer looked at me. Sir. I opened my solar app and turned the screen toward him. I didn't explain. I didn't argue. I let the graph speak. He frowned. This looks detailed. The utility is already investigating an unauthorized connection that fed into her house, I said calmly. Karen snapped. That's a lie. The officer raised a hand. Ma'am. She froze. Have you had electrical work done recently? She hesitated just long enough to answer the question she didn't want to hear. No. The officer nodded slowly. Okay. Please move your vehicle. Karen's face flushed. You're taking his side. I'm enforcing the law. She stormed to her car and yanked the door open, nearly ripping it off its hinges. The SUV screeched as she moved it, tires chirping in anger. She parked crookedly across the street, glared at me, then at the officer. "This isn't over," she said. The officer looked at her. "It rarely is." After he left, I stood in the driveway for a long moment, letting the sun hit my face. I felt steady. Not victorious yet, but steady. That afternoon, the retaliation emails started. Violation notices. One after another. Some dated months back. Some citing rules that didn't exist. Others referencing sections of the HOA handbook that had been repealed years ago. Karen was throwing everything she had, hoping volume would replace legitimacy. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded every single notice to the HOA attorney. And then to the utility. And then to the county zoning office. Because when someone panics, they make mistakes. By evening, the utility called again. "We need access to your property tomorrow," the technician said. "We're expanding the scope of the investigation." How wide? Wide enough. That night, Karen didn't sleep. I know because she turned her house into a lighthouse. Every exterior light on. Garage open and shut twice. At one point, she dragged something heavy across the floor, the sound echoing through the quiet street. At 12:31 a.m., my app pinged again. Not a theft alert. A tamper alert. Someone had opened a panel downstream. Not drawing power. Not feeding. Just opening and closing access points, like they were trying to erase fingerprints without understanding how deep they were already embedded. I saved the logs. At 7 a.m., 2 utility trucks arrived. At 7:12, a county inspector pulled up. At 7:18, Karen came outside in a robe, phone pressed to her ear, shouting at someone who wasn't listening anymore. The inspectors didn't go to my house first. They went to hers. I watched from my porch as they circled her garage, took photos, opened panels, and spoke quietly to each other. Karen hovered, gesturing wildly, pointing toward my house like a compass needle stuck on blame. One of the inspectors finally shook his head. Karen's voice rose. "This is harassment." The county inspector replied, calm and firm. "No, ma'am. This is evidence." I felt it then. Not joy. Not revenge. Relief. Because this was bigger than the HOA now. Bigger than her threats. She had crossed a line that didn't bend for titles or tantrums. And for the first time, Karen looked like she understood that. The shift was almost impressive in its speed. One day she was an authority figure enforcing standards. The next she was a besieged homeowner claiming persecution by a hostile neighbor with too much technology and too much time. If there had been medals for narrative gymnastics, she would have podiumed. The first sign was the letter. Not an email. A letter. Printed, signed, and slipped into mailboxes across the neighborhood sometime before dawn. I found mine folded neatly, my name handwritten on the front like a personal invitation to nonsense. It opened with concern. Karen wrote about harassment, about intimidation, about how certain residents were weaponizing data to attack volunteer board members. She never named me, but she didn't have to. She described my solar system in enough detail that anyone who'd ever walked past my house knew exactly who she meant. She claimed the utility investigation was a misunderstanding, a clerical error, an overreaction caused by misleading information provided by a disgruntled homeowner. I laughed out loud when I read that part. Not because it was funny, but because it was desperate. By noon, the HOA Facebook group exploded. Karen posted screenshots of cherry-picked graphs, stripped of timestamps and context. She framed them as proof that my system behaved erratically. Comments poured in. Some supportive, some confused, some quietly skeptical. Then she crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She posted my address. Not directly. Just casually mentioned it in a reply, framed as transparency. If anyone wants to see the installation in question, it's at the corner lot near the trail entrance. My phone started buzzing almost immediately. Mark texted first. She shouldn't have done that. Another neighbor followed. This is getting ugly. I screenshotted everything. The post. The comments. The edits when she realized people were pushing back. Once again, she was leaving a trail. Around 3, a black SUV pulled up in front of my house. Not Karen's. This one was unmarked, clean, and quiet. 2 people stepped out. One wore a utility badge. The other didn't. "We're expanding the investigation," the woman said after introductions. "There's reason to believe this wasn't an isolated incident." I led them to the inverter and pulled up the full logs. Not summaries. Not highlights. Everything. Weeks of data, layered and time-aligned. She leaned in, studying the screen. He watched my face. "This is meticulous," he said. "It has to be." She scrolled. "These patterns repeat. Same window. Same load profile." "Yes." She looked up. "We've seen similar signatures elsewhere." I felt a chill. Elsewhere where? Other developments. Other complaints that didn't quite make sense until now. The picture widened in my mind, unsettling and dark. Karen wasn't just reckless. She was systematic. If she'd convinced herself that solar power was communal, that HOA authority extended into infrastructure, she might have tried this before. The man closed his notebook. "We're coordinating with legal now." I didn't ask who's legal. That evening, Karen escalated again. She filed a formal HOA complaint against me. Not about solar. About noise. She claimed my inverter emitted a constant hum that disrupted her sleep. She attached a blurry video shot from inside her bedroom, recorded at midnight, capturing absolute silence with the caption "audible vibration detected." The absurdity was almost admirable. The HOA president called me, voice strained. "She wants a hearing." "Of course she does. Tomorrow." Perfect. The hearing was held in the same community room, but the energy was different. Karen sat stiffly, flanked by papers and highlighted documents. I noticed the absence of her electrician. The chair beside her was empty. She spoke first, voice trembling just enough to sound injured. "I've been subjected to months of targeted harassment," she said. "My integrity questioned. My safety compromised." I listened, arms folded, waiting. She turned toward me. "Your system is aggressive. Overpowered. It invades the shared space." "Electricity doesn't invade," I said. "It follows path." She bristled. "You're twisting words." "No. I'm clarifying them." I stood and connected my phone to the projector again. This time, I didn't start with graphs. I started with the HOA handbook. Page numbers. Clauses. The sections governing utilities, access, and authority. Then county code. Then state law. I scrolled slowly, letting it sink in. Then I brought up the logs. "This is what harassment looks like," I said. "Repeated unauthorized access. Tampering attempts. Data manipulation. False reports." Karen shot to her feet. "This is character assassination." The HOA president raised his voice. "Sit down." She didn't. She pointed at me, finger shaking. "You think you've won because you're good with numbers." "No," I said quietly. "I think I've won because you're bad with boundaries." The room fell silent. The HOA president cleared his throat. "We're suspending enforcement actions related to this matter pending legal review." Karen laughed, sharp and hysterical. "You can't do that." "We already did." She looked around, searching for support, but found only distance. People avoided her gaze. A few shook their heads. As the meeting ended, she rushed past me, shoulder clipping mine hard enough to be intentional. "Watch yourself," she hissed. I smiled. "I always do." That night, the final piece fell into place. I received an email from the utilities legal department. Subject line simple. Case escalation. They'd traced the unauthorized connection hardware. Serial numbers. Purchase records. The equipment had been bought online. Under Karen's name. Shipped directly to her address. I sat back and let out a slow breath. She hadn't just stolen power. She'd signed for it. Karen didn't come out of her house for 2 days after the utility email landed in my inbox. No morning patrols. No pacing phone calls on the porch. Her curtains stayed drawn, her garage shut like a clenched jaw. The silence felt deliberate, the kind that comes right before someone decides which lie to die on. The utility didn't give her that time. I found out because a certified letter arrived at my door by courier, signature required. It wasn't addressed to her, but it might as well have been a countdown clock. The utility was formally notifying all affected parties of an ongoing fraud investigation involving unauthorized energy diversion, meter tampering, and infrastructure interference. They requested my continued cooperation and access to logs. At the bottom was a line that made me pause. Referral to state regulators pending. That's when this stopped being a neighborhood drama and became a legal event. Karen resurfaced that afternoon. Not in person. Online. She posted a video. It appeared in the HOA Facebook group, then vanished, then reappeared on a neighborhood watch page, then on a local community forum. Someone saved it before she could delete it again, and after that it was unstoppable. She stood in her living room, camera held too close, eyes red but dry. She talked about bullying, about being targeted for volunteering, about how technology was being used to intimidate her and threaten her family. She never said my name, but she said solar extremist once, and that told everyone everything. She cried exactly when she meant to. The comments were split at first. Sympathy mixed with skepticism. Then someone posted a screenshot. It was one of mine. Not edited. Not cropped. Just a clean capture of her Facebook post from earlier that week, where she'd accidentally replied to the wrong comment thread and written, "It was just temporary until the panels paid for themselves." The shift was immediate. People started asking questions she couldn't answer. Why temporary? Paid for themselves how? Whose panels? Karen deleted the video within the hour. It didn't matter. That evening, the HOA president called again. His voice sounded tired in a way I recognized, the tone of someone who just realized how deep the hole went. "We received a letter from an attorney representing Karen," he said. "She's claiming defamation." I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "Of course she is. She's demanding the HOA issue a statement clearing her of wrongdoing. And threatening to sue if we don't." I waited. He sighed. "We're not doing that." "Good." There was a pause. Off the record, the utility contacted us. They advised we suspend her board membership effective immediately. "Off the record," I said. "But you're calling me." He exhaled. "We're calling an emergency vote." I didn't celebrate. Not yet. At 10 p.m., my doorbell rang. This time, when I checked the camera, my stomach tightened. Karen stood there alone. No blazer. No sunglasses. No performance. Just her, pale and rigid, arms folded like she was holding herself together. I didn't open the door. I spoke through it. "You shouldn't be here." "I just want to talk," she said. Her voice sounded raw. Different. "You've said that before." She swallowed. "I made a mistake. I waited. I thought," she continued, "that since the power was there, and unused at night, and the HOA covers common infrastructure anyway." "You thought what?" I asked. "That ownership turned off after sunset." Her voice cracked. "You don't understand how much pressure I was under." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I stayed quiet. "I just needed time," she said. "A few months. Then I would have fixed it." "By stealing." "By borrowing," she snapped, then winced at her own words. I opened the door then. Not all the way. Just enough that she could see my face. "You installed hardware. You drew power deliberately. You tried to bury evidence. You blamed me. You tried to find me into silence." Tears finally came. I didn't mean for it to go this far. But it did. She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Not remorse. Calculation, wounded and frantic. "If you drop this," she said quietly, "I'll resign. I'll make it right." I shook my head. "It's not mine to drop anymore." Her face hardened. "You could still help me." I smiled, not kindly. "I already am." I closed the door. At 6 a.m. the next morning, 3 vehicles arrived at Karen's house. One from the utility. One from the county. One unmarked. Neighbors gathered at windows like birds on a wire. Phones came out. Whispers spread. Karen stood on her porch in a robe again, arms wrapped around herself, arguing with a man holding a clipboard. Another took photos. A third spoke quietly into a radio. By noon, a notice was taped to her garage. Service disconnected pending investigation. At 3 p.m., the HOA emergency vote passed. Karen was removed from the board. By evening, the local community forum had a new thread. HOA VP under investigation for power theft. I sat on my porch, watching the sun dip low behind my panels, watching the batteries fill, watching everything work exactly as it should. Karen had spent months pretending authority could replace permission. Now she was learning the difference, and Chapter 6 ended the way it had to, with the power finally shut off. Not mine. Hers. The morning after Karen's power was cut, a news van parked at the corner by the trail entrance. It wasn't a big station, just local, but it might as well have been a spotlight. The reporter stood in front of her camera rehearsing lines while the cameraman adjusted focus toward Karen's house, careful to keep my place out of frame. They already knew who the villain was. They didn't need me for that. Karen did not come outside. Instead, a statement appeared online around noon, attributed to her attorney. It was dense, defensive, and full of words like alleged and misunderstanding and unauthorized assumptions. It claimed Karen had relied on professional advice. It suggested she'd been misled by contractors. It implied bias. It never denied the connection existed. That omission mattered. The comments were brutal. Someone dug up public records showing she'd chaired the HOA Utilities Subcommittee for 3 years. Someone else posted screenshots of old HOA emails where she'd lectured residents about compliance and fairness. The contrast was sharp enough to cut. By mid-afternoon, the utility followed up with their own statement. They didn't use her name. They didn't need to. They confirmed an active investigation into deliberate energy diversion using consumer-grade hardware installed without permits, bypassing metering safeguards. They emphasized safety risk, fire hazards, grid instability. And then came the line that made my phone buzz nonstop. No evidence suggests the reporting homeowner engaged in any wrongdoing. Karen's narrative collapsed in real time. The HOA president stopped answering calls. The Facebook group locked comments. The board issued a bland notice about respecting privacy while simultaneously removing Karen's name from the website. Someone replaced it with acting VP within minutes. That evening, Mark came over with a six-pack and an expression halfway between awe and concern. "This got big," he said. I nodded. "Bigger than I wanted. You okay?" I took a sip and watched the sun hit the panels just right, the surface glowing faintly. "I'm fine. I just didn't expect her to burn everything down with her." He hesitated. "People are saying she might get charged." I shrugged. "That's not up to me." But it was never really about charges. It was about consequences, and those were already landing. Karen tried one last angle. She requested mediation. Not through the HOA. Not through the utility. Through a private firm, expensive and aggressive, the kind that specialized in making problems disappear quietly. The request came with language about mutual benefit and de-escalation, and avoiding further reputational harm. I read it once and forwarded it to the utility's legal department without comment. They replied an hour later. "Please do not engage directly." That was that. The next morning, I woke up to a knock that wasn't Karen and wasn't the HOA. 2 investigators stood on my porch, credentials visible, demeanor calm. They asked about timelines, about my first suspicions, about the confrontation at the driveway, about the HOA meeting. I answered everything. I didn't embellish. I didn't editorialize. I didn't need to. The data filled in the gaps where memory softened edges. When they left, one of them paused. "You did the right thing reporting this early." I almost laughed. Early is generous. That afternoon, Karen's house went dark in a different way. A moving truck pulled up. Not dramatic. Not rushed. Just quiet efficiency. Boxes came out. Furniture followed. A mattress, lamp, a framed print she'd once bragged about importing. She supervised from the porch, sunglasses back on, posture stiff, phone pressed to her ear. She never looked at my house. By evening, the for sale sign appeared. No open house. No staging. Just a number and a promise of quick closing. The rumor mill spun hard. Some said legal fees. Some said she couldn't stay after what happened. Some said the utility had liens pending. The truth didn't matter anymore. The result did. That night, I got one final message from her. A text. No greeting. No signature. You didn't have to destroy my life. I stared at it for a long moment, then typed back. You destroyed it yourself. I just kept records. She didn't reply. By the end of the week, the news cycle moved on. Another scandal. Another outrage. The van disappeared. The forums quieted. Life resumed its ordinary rhythm. But the consequences didn't leave with the cameras. Karen's resignation became permanent. The investigation continued. The HOA rewrote its bylaws around utilities and access, this time with actual legal review. Neighbors stopped treating solar panels like curiosities and started treating them like infrastructure. As for me, my system ran flawlessly. Every watt accounted for. Every path known. Every boundary respected. Chapter 7 ended not with a bang, but with something more unsettling for someone like Karen. Silence. No authority. No audience. No power to pull from someone else's work. Just an empty house. And the knowledge that the final chapter hadn't even arrived yet. Karen's house sold fast. Too fast. No negotiations, no second showing, no questions asked. Someone wanted it gone from their balance sheet, and they didn't care what it cost. The moving truck disappeared, the sign came down, and just like that, the center of the storm was an empty driveway and a darkened porch. But the ending didn't come quietly for her. 2 weeks after she left, a plain envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single page, printed, unsigned. It was a notice of disposition. The state regulator had concluded its preliminary investigation. Unauthorized energy diversion confirmed. Meter bypass confirmed. Safety violations documented. The case had been referred for enforcement action, including fines and potential restitution to the utility. I sat at my kitchen table and read it twice. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I wanted to feel the weight of it. This wasn't HOA nonsense. This wasn't neighborhood drama. This was official, irreversible, and permanent. Later that afternoon, the utility called one last time. We've closed the technical side of your case, the technician said. Your system is fully cleared. No flags. No restrictions. And Karen. There was a pause. Her account has been terminated. Future service contingent on review. I thanked him and hung up. That evening, the HOA held its final meeting on the matter. No emergency language. No theatrics. Just a formal acknowledgement that the board had failed in its oversight and that corrective measures were being implemented. New rules. New checks. Independent audit. The HOA president apologized publicly, voice tight but sincere. No one mentioned Karen by name. They didn't have to. After the meeting, Mark walked with me back toward our houses. Street lights flickered on as dusk settled in. Hard to believe it's over, he said. It's not over, I replied. It's finished. There's a difference. He nodded, thinking that through. A week later, I got the last message I would ever receive from her. Not a threat. Not an accusation. An invoice. She'd sent a demand through a lawyer, claiming I owed her damages for emotional distress, reputational harm, and loss of income related to her resignation. It was absurd on its face, padded with vague language and no evidence. I forwarded it to the utilities legal department. They replied within the hour. We'll handle this. And they did. The response letter was short, precise, and devastating. It outlined documented findings, timestamps, purchase records, video evidence, and witness statements. It concluded by advising her counsel to reconsider further contact. There was no reply. Months passed. Summer turned into fall. Leaves collected along the curb where Karen's SUV used to idle. A new family moved into her old house, waved when they saw me, and asked about the solar panels with genuine curiosity instead of suspicion. I helped them understand how net metering worked. I explained batteries. I warned them gently about respecting boundaries, theirs and others. They listened. One afternoon, as I checked the app out of habit, I noticed something that made me smile. My system had hit a milestone. A clean number. Total lifetime production, neatly logged. Every kilowatt accounted for. I thought back to that first ping at 2:14 a.m., the moment everything started. How absurd it had felt. How small the theft seemed at first. Just a little power. Just a temporary connection. Karen had believed rules were flexible if you held the right title. That authority could substitute for consent. That systems existed to serve her, not constrain her. She was wrong. Because systems remember. They remember timestamps and signatures and flows and patterns. They don't care about excuses or tiers or committees. They don't bend to intimidation. They don't forget. And neither do records. On a clear evening, I sat on my porch and watched the sun sink behind the panels, the batteries filling quietly, obediently, exactly as designed. No drama. No theft. No chaos. Just power, moving where it was allowed to move. That was the real karma in the end. Not humiliation. Not headlines. Not even fines. It was the loss of access. Karen had helped herself to something that was never hers, convinced she'd never be caught. And now, everywhere she went, every meter she ever touched again would ask the same silent question. Are you authorized? The answer, finally, was no.